To order the January 5th, 2026 meeting of the Electricity as Vehicle Fuel Working Group. A quorum is present. Oh, I have to gavel. All right. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes from last meeting? And is there a motion to approve?
Madam Chair.
Laura?
I would, thank you, Madam Chair. Laura Ziegler with the AGC. I would ask for one correction.
Oh, certainly. Can you say it out loud?
I was present at that meeting. It's under members excused that I am listed.
Ah, Laura, well, thank you. So noted.
In my attendance, that'd be much appreciated.
All right. I want everybody to know that Laura Ziegler was in fact at the last meeting and the minutes will be changed. Anybody else have any corrections or comments on the minutes from last meeting? All right, with that one correction, do we have a motion to approve?
So moved, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you so much. All in favor of approving the minutes with that one change, say aye.
Aye.
And all opposed? Excellent, the motion prevails and the minutes then are approved as modified. So, Happy New Year and welcome everyone. Welcome Senator Howe, it's good to see you. Of course, good to see everybody else, but we're just happy to have you not online today. We just have one person online to my knowledge, and today actually we have 4 people online. And so, as is our tradition, I would ask that as we are conversing today and talking about some of the ideas we bring to this working group, you would introduce yourself before you speak, and Austin and I will take note of who's online and make sure that we recognize those people as needed. So just remember that not everybody's here in person and that we want them to know who's speaking when we're speaking. So today, we will go through a couple housekeeping items. Austin's going to walk us through what the legislative report should look like. I wanted to bring up just briefly what the duties of this commission are or this working group are before we get started with that. So if you would let me do that. And then we'll just have discussion. I will guide the discussion, but really, I'm welcoming everybody to comment as we go through some of the broad topics. I want everybody to know that we're not done getting ideas. We had one idea come in over the weekend. We welcome more to come in. Bentley, is Bentley here? I don't see him. Bentley Graves, for example, sent in a letter, so that format is welcome as well. And I would like to just state that I'm happy to accept ideas and insights all the way up until the next meeting. Of course, if something comes in after the next meeting, I think we can probably be flexible too, but I would encourage you, if you haven't sent in your ideas or if something comes to you today, that you send those in and we have at least one more meeting to talk about it. All right, so with that, I think we'll just remind us of the duties that were laid out in subdivision 5 of the bill that was passed last year or last session. So at a minimum, our working group has been charged with providing a comprehensive analysis of electricity used as vehicle fuel infrastructure opportunities and barriers. So we're supposed to be looking at this comprehensively, and some part of the report will have an analysis. We've been really lucky in the last several meetings to get what I consider to be really great foundational information on all the options, as well as the implications for our departments and those who will be responsible for implementing whatever we decide. I think we've been really fortunate to hear from several of our state colleagues in terms of what's working and what's not working and how we might be able to learn from their trials. We won't pass judgment on that, but just on what they've been doing. So we've been really lucky there. So I would expect that our report will have some analysis of what the current state of practice is and what the issues are in terms of implementation for any of the ideas that we have. Then item 2 is to develop a roadmap with policy and funding recommendations for sustainable transportation funding mechanism consistent with our Minnesota Constitution. Danny, this is really hard. I'm going to have to make this expectation that that's Article 14. Ooh, I haven't read Roman numerals in a long time. Including a plan for the studied mechanisms to replace the electric vehicle surcharges under Minnesota statutes. And then also, so before we move on, I want you to note that policy is included in that. So this group should allow ourselves to not just talk about funding recommendations, but really to think about policy implications and where we're moving forward in terms of the big picture. So this is not just about funding, it's about policy too. We've been empowered to do that. And then lastly, to research and analyze legislation and policy made in other states to determine equitable and comprehensive fuel assessment methods for electric vehicles. So again, we're charged to do an analysis. We're charged to develop a roadmap that addresses both funding and policy, and then also research and analyze legislation and policy made in other states. So it's pretty comprehensive, but also I consider to be pretty, there's a wide range of things we may choose to do. All right, and again, our duties, we've been assigned to do that by mid-February. So we have one more meeting in January, and at that meeting, I would hope that we'd be able to make some decisions as a working group. Whether we do that by consensus or by majority, I think is something we'll talk about in a few minutes, because I think that's an important thing for us to agree on. By all means, I have not decided that we do anything by majority, because I don't think that we have put a huge amount of effort into making sure that every single stakeholder is present, and I don't know that by majority would be necessarily fair. So I want you to know that I come to this meeting with that expectation already. However, I think it's important for us to decide as a working group how we're going to decide what goes in and what doesn't go in. I'm okay with everything going in, and the working group continuing to explore ideas even after our report is, well, not the working group, but I think all of us as policymakers or as people that are interested in this topic certainly can continue to move forward with any of these ideas. But anyway, so we'll talk about that in a minute. But I think for now, I think we'll have Austin to provide a brief description and outline of what our report will look like so that we have an expectation of what our work will entail in the next month. So any questions or any reflection or insight before we hand it over to Austin to walk through that? Okay, excellent. Austin?
Thank you, Chair and members. In your packets, you have an example of a table of contents that would be consistent with an LCC report like this. This format is flexible and may change. I just kind of wanted to walk through it with you early on. In sub D8 of the enabling legislation, it describes what's needed in the report, which is due by February 15th, which will end up being reported to the governor and the chairs and ranking minority members of the legislative committees with jurisdiction over transportation. At a minimum, the report must, 1, summarize the activities of the group, and 2, provide findings and recommendations adopted by the group. Turning to the table of contents, the bulk of what I would anticipate the bulk of the report would be under the recommendations tab, and the rest is kind of doing the work of the summarizing the activities of the group. Myself and other staff will be working on this. If you have any questions along the way, please reach out. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Austin. All right, so you'll also notice in your handouts today, we have all of the recommendations that were received, both alphabetically by author or by submitter and by topic. I think it might be most helpful of us to look at this by topic, but you certainly can refer back to it as alphabetized. These are also kind of cross-referenced. If you're interested, you can go back and forth, but I'm going to be working off the one that's based on categories. I think before we dive into the issues, I just want to kind of summarize where we are. This is from my perspective, and I'd love your feedback or pushback or agreeance or whatever. But really where we are right now is at a point where our roads and bridges are funded, I mean, I'm about to say the obvious, but they're funded by gas tax revenue. We also have other means of funding, but really gas tax and motor vehicle registration is a big part of that funding. We had a very good presentation early on that talked about that funding and, you know, how it's distributed. As we look at an increased percentage of vehicles not using gas, that revenue stream goes away. So it's a very obvious issue. We're at a point in our continuum of road funding of like figuring out what are we going to do to address this lack of revenue source, right? So I think that's compounded by the fact that vehicles may or may not become more gas efficient. More and more people will drive electric vehicles. We're going to see more and more commercial vehicles that are electric. I really appreciated hearing from the expert from Utah who talked about how vehicles might be charged. I think more than anything, some of the presentations that we've heard in this working group have made me realize we don't know what the future is. We don't, you know, we are at a point where roadway funding is really at a literal crossroads. And so this is something that we have to do. We have to figure out a way to maintain continuous funding streams for our roads and bridges. I don't know. I guess I would love your feedback here. I think we can do at least an incremental. We can address that incrementally right now. I don't think that we're in any position to make the final adjustment there because things may very well change. I mean, you know, but certainly we are at a point right now where we have to do something. Electric vehicles make up 6% of the vehicles on our roadway right now, but as we received in, I don't know if it was Fresh Energy or who, but that increment or that change every year is sure to rise. And so it's our duty, I think our duty as the maintainers and builders of our roadway and bridge system to figure out how to address that. I hope that you had a chance to look through some of the ideas that people came up with. I think there's certainly a fairness issue that we have to discuss. And, you know, that brings me to question, well, what is fair? Like, is it fair for us to charge? Some of the EV advocacy groups noted that a vehicle's sticker price has nothing to do with the amount of damage it does to a road. But I would counter by saying, well, we've never really charged fairly for how much damage. Sorry, trucker guy, but it's true. We know that trucks impart a huge amount of damage to our roads as compared to a single passenger vehicle. But that's never been really how we assess for the cost of building out the roadway system. You know, I went really far down this whole idea of how, you know, how can we be fair in that way? Do we charge the guy who lives at the end of a road for his mileage to his road when he's the only one that drives to and from it? Or do we as a society decide to support an entire system? And over, we hear about Minnesota's system and how big it is, but really when you look at the mileage distribution, a lot of those miles are township roads and gravel roads, and we're really not looking comprehensively at how do we assess fairly. So yes, fairness is a big issue, but I don't know that we have the capacity in this group in the next month to figure out how to fairly assess for the cost of creating and maintaining a roadway system. But I want you to know that I see that and I hear it. I just wonder if that question is too big for us. But certainly I hear it and I understand. I think we also have an opportunity right now, like, well, how should we assess for our roads? I mean, I think road user charge is really an exciting idea. But then we also have the privacy issue. So I want you to know, I find this all really interesting. I think we are at a point where we could do some big stuff. We could think about policy changes and what that means. But at the very foundational element, we have a road system and a bridge system that we must maintain. And that, to me, is kind of our core responsibility, is how to continue to fund our roadway and bridge system in a time where we know, I think it's safe to say that the number of electric vehicles on the road is going to increase. So what do we do about it? Anyway, I think that's kind of an exciting thing to think about, but I think it's also a big challenge. I'm grateful for the states that have gone ahead of us. Steve and I, or Representative Elkins and I, have spent some additional time with the people from Utah. I think they are really smart, and they're really thinking through this, and they have some good ideas. But anyway, that just sets the stage. So for those of you that haven't had a chance to go through this, we had, again, I would encourage you to give us more ideas. We have several people who are really in favor of the road user charge. Whether you submitted that as an idea or not, doesn't, we could all be, some of us could be in favor of that and not have submitted, but at least 2 people were very much in favor of that. We had people who submitted talking about the tax on electric vehicle charging. Some people want to repeal it. Some people want to maintain it. Some people want to broaden it to include publicly owned charging stations. I was recently up in Grand Marais. One of the best charging stations is at the library or at the Public Works facility. So thinking about the way we define publicly owned versus not publicly owned. And then there were several people who submitted ideas to increase the charging down to level 2, and so not just level 3. Also, there was people in favor of keeping the EV surcharge. I also know that there's people in favor of getting rid of that. We also had people who want to end sales tax on electricity. I think there's much that we can do around that. Looking into, if you remember at our last meeting, we had Matt Cernick talk about this whole issue of off-road use, and I think that's something that we definitely should explore. And then Justin and I think one other person recommended expanding the definition of auto parts to include charging equipment. So we have some ideas, and I would love to now to open it up and see if anybody has any additional ideas on that. Representative Elkins, I would love it if you would take a few minutes and just talk about what you're thinking. I didn't really warn you, but I mean, you know so much about this that I think you probably can go without much prep here. But what are your thoughts? Representative Elkins?
Well, I think if there's one thing that has been driven home over the course of this is that that charging based on the amount of electricity going to the vehicle really has all kinds of problems with it. It's totally impractical for the 80% of vehicles that are charged at home. There's just no way to do it. And several of the people who presented ideas noted that with both sales tax on electricity plus the surcharge that we enacted this year, we're really double charging the people who are using public chargers, and those people are already paying a much higher price for the electricity itself than those of us who charge at home. I pay 5 cents a kilowatt hour at home right now because I'm on an off-peak charging plan, whereas the average, I think AAA estimates that the average public charging cost is something like 36 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's already a multiple. They're already paying a multiple for that public charging, plus being double taxed, once for the electricity, once for this special surcharge that we've had. But in contrast to that, we're seeing that there are 4 states with mileage-based user charges. In my opinion, I think Utah is ahead of the pack. The people from Virginia basically told us that they copied Utah. The bill that I've got right now with Senator Carlson is basically based on the Utah experience, and I would want to fine-tune that bill based on what we've learned this year, and plus in light of the fact that we do have this large registration surcharge now as well. And the bill that I have is written has it, the mileage-based charge phasing in slowly, which is what Utah did originally, and I don't think that part is necessary. And I think I could do a better job now right now I've got 5 rate levels to account for the impact of weight, fuel efficiency on the roads, and I think I could take that a little bit further as well. But I think it's, there are 4 states doing it. I've got a bill, as Mr. Rodin knows, I've been working on this for like 15 years, and I'm confident that I could put together a bill that the legislature would support. Now that we've basically, I think, driven a stake through the heart of the idea that no, we can't really, it's not going to be practical to do an electricity-based charge on home-charged vehicles.
Yeah, Representative Elkins, I want to just note that I did explore a little bit this whole idea of determining the amount of electricity being used at home, because we saw that several times, that it was not fair. We have to either figure out how to charge people for what they do at home, or...
There's no way to measure it.
Well, there is, yeah, Senator Howe?
Sorry, Madam Chair, but I don't like the idea there's no way to measure it, because I truly believe that we can do it the same way those of us that run businesses, take out a mileage, deduct a mileage on our taxes for business use. We could set a determination of what a mile per kilowatt would be, a standard, which same as deductions for 55 cents or 58 cents or 65 cents per mile that you deduct on your taxes now for business use. You can determine how much you charge at home for the miles that you used and come up with a number of what the tax would be on that. And let's say that you not only charge at home, but you use public charging stations. So now you've got the tax piece that you paid on that public charger. So you deduct that and you include that deduction, and you've got your, and you could come up with at the tax time how much you owe at the end of the year for your gas tax, or your fuel tax, I should say. So I don't think it's outstretched that you cannot do it. I think it's feasible. I think it's doable, just like and they say, well, there's going to be all kinds of fraud in that. Well, I think with the idea that you could be audited for that, just like you're audited on your tax,
Right.
income tax, I don't see where most folks are going to cheat a whole lot on that, with the idea that, same thing with our income tax, that you cheat on that.
Well, how is that different? So I'm here, I would like to figure this out. So how does that differ from a road user charge? Isn't that kind of the same idea?
Similar to that, but you're not putting, but you're stubby pencil in it. You're not doing, and I suppose you could do, there's a method out there that I think you could have that electronically done, and you could choose to do it that way.
Right, that's one of the options that we learned about.
That's one of the options. So you could choose to do it that way, or if you decide that you don't want to go that route, you could stubby pencil it. So to say that you can't do this on the person that charges at home, I think is just drawing a line saying you prefer not to do this. I prefer to do it that way myself, because it maintains your privacy and it allows you to actually be fair and not double taxed on that charging at home.
So I think that's what Utah does. They give people the option.
Yeah.
So what we learned is, and this was just in a recent meeting we had, there is an option if you choose, just as you said, Senator Howe. So I like that. What I was going to say, and so let's just park that over here, is there is not technology current. So I worked with some of the academics at the university to figure out what it would take, not to figure out, to inquire about, because certainly this is a big issue, what it would take to actually get some kind of monitor on a high voltage charger, and it seems not doable. That technology is not available currently, right? So the technology is available for a low voltage charger to monitor. I've seen my husband has one of those things, but for high voltage, it becomes more dangerous. So that's what I was going to say, is the technology for us to do without an extra meter. I think that was one of the things, if you remember, early on, we talked about the cost of an extra meter. I think it's $16 a month, wasn't it, or something like that?
If you buy one, it can be like $1,500.
Yeah, and the cost of the extra meter exceeds the revenue from what you could get from the tax. So that's what I meant in terms of it's not that charging, the meter capacity right now does not seem to be something that's feasible. That's what I meant. But I think that we're actually pretty close on this idea of estimating the tax based on home charge and any privacy concerns that people have in terms of having, or not even privacy, I think it's more of a hassle. Some people do want to do the pencil calc and turn in their mileage, but if you don't want to be bothered with that, we could do what Utah does and allow people to bypass that process. So I think we're actually pretty close on that.
Yeah, so.
Representative Elkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, I included two studies for the record that were done by Edison Electric, one of them that basically said no, and one was actually a local Minnesota study that basically said no, that the meters in the car are simply not accurate enough to be used for billing or taxation purposes. And Senator Howe, I've been offering, I think you missed part of the presentation that I gave. I've been offering you for 3 months now to give you a personal presentation to recap what everybody else heard, and that offer is still open.
That was online, right? And that's what, I kind of went through most of this stuff. So
Yeah.
I don't think I needed a personal, and my time is pretty valuable. I didn't want to waste either one of our time, so doing that. So I think I've got a good grasp of it.
Yeah, I think, and also, this is not like a standard committee where everybody has to go through me. So let's just open it up. What other thoughts do people have about this? If you remember, the road user charge based on either a voluntary submittal or just a standard charge. John? Oh, Tom. John. Yeah.
Madam Chair, Tony Coolis from Quick Trip.
Tony,
First of all, I just wanted to clarify with Austin and DeMarco. Adam Schwartz from Quick Trip had sent a letter, and then I noticed it wasn't in the packet, but I think it was after the deadline. But if you need that, let me know so that I could follow up with that.
Tony, did you see the letter, and can you tell us what it said, or what the general idea was?
What I'm going to kind of bring up right now, Madam Chair,
okay.
is that, and mainly, and I think you saw it in some of the letters in the comments and also from some of the state agencies, to clarify the law right now on the sales use excise tax, to try and go through and figure out so that we don't do, as Senator Howe and Representative Elkins had brought up, kind of the double taxation that we went through there, to try and figure that out. And then a second part of that was, I think the agency, the Department of Revenue, when they brought it up also, on the collection of that, depending on how we clarify that, the collection of it. The statute right now says the 23rd of every month.
Yeah.
And I think the agency, as well as utilities and everybody else, had said, is there a way to work with utilities right now on how they do that, whether it's yearly or how they want to do it, to clarify that out. So because we have this law in 2025 that passed, and it's going to go into effect here in 2027. So I think in 2026, if we could clarify the sales, the excise, the use, and the collection of it, that would be a good one to knock off the list.
Yeah, Tony, I agree. I guess I was thinking that one was kind of at least between ourselves, we had talked about that as something that would be very easy to do, and I'm sorry, I should have brought that up as well.
No.
But I think there are some clarifications and some of the things we heard from Revenue and others, and how Wisconsin does their collection. I think it's every 6 months or quarterly, I can't remember. I certainly think we could streamline some of that. But duly noted, and we'll make sure that we get Quick Trip's letter in the summary report. We want to make this, we don't want to put an undue burden on collectors, and we also want to make sure that we're not spending more money collecting the tax than we are actually getting revenue. So that's a good point. What are your other thoughts? What do you think about going down to level 2 charges or chargers? Several of you recommended that. It does seem to make sense if we're going to be charging for tax, if we decide as a group to charge tax or to impose a tax on charging, I don't know why a level 3 would deserve more tax than a level 2. Senator Howe?
Well, thank you. I think we should set just a policy that all electricity used as a fuel should be taxed, as the Constitution says. So whatever level we can collect it at and identify it at, we should collect it.
Pollard, John?
Thanks, Madam
Sorry.
Chair. John Pollard with the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 49, representing the Minnesota building trades. I would agree with Senator Howe, but I would just add in, too, that Minnesota's highway and road system is based on the idea that we all pay our fair share. So it doesn't, and yes, we all understand there are things like tax credits and incentives, and those are policy decisions that you all make. But in this particular case, it seems to me that it's about as fair as you can be if everybody's using the road and they all pay their fair share. Maybe I'm a simpleton about this, but I just think it's fair that we happen to have a system that is almost 100 years old that says if you're using it, you pay for it. And if you don't use it, if you use transit, if you walk, if you bike, you don't. And so I don't see the difference between a level 1, 2, 3 charger, but maybe I'm being simple.
I think you're being extremely genius about that, John Pollard. But it does bring up a good point. I think the challenge for us is the implementation. So I agree with Senator Howe that a fuel is a fuel, right? So, and I'll see you guys in 10 years when we're talking about how to tax hydrogen or whatever the next thing is. But I think, so I think as a policy, taxing all fuel so that we are fair is a value statement we may choose to implement or put into the report. How we do that is then the challenge. And that also brings up another issue. At least I'm speaking for myself, when I proposed that we have this surcharge, it was not by any means meant to be out an infinite charge, okay? So I did very much appreciate the feedback that a vehicle's value does not at all have any relationship to the damage on the road. I mean, maybe it does, but definitely not across the board. The challenge is, how do we get revenue until we get that policy, right? So this, for me at least, was meant as a stopgap measure of like, well, we don't have the tax on the fuel yet. However, we do need to get some revenue, so we have the surcharge. If you read through the list of ideas, several people propose that we eliminate that surcharge after we get to a certain percentage. That seems arbitrary to me. I think we should think about the surcharge, and in terms of fairness or implementation, how we want to continue to apply that. It does seem somewhat arbitrary to me. We tried to equate it to a somewhat similar amount of tax that a traditional gas-powered passenger vehicle would spend. But, I mean, you don't have to tell me that I can make any number work depending on which number I pull out in terms of average or gas mileage, or we also have our gas tax changing from year to year. So I think we need to decide as a group, too, how we're going to address the surcharge. Senator Howe.
Chair, I think you bring up an important point, because as we go through this, and as you see now that our fuel tax is tied to inflation, is going to continually go up, so we need to really look at how we're going to have to tie this tax to the same type of an inflationary measure.
And that was noted by several people.
The other thing that I would like to see us take a look at as far as your surcharge and as I have been a proponent of it, because it's simple and it's easy and it's quick, right? It's not saying it's fair. And if we're going to talk about fair, I would propose that we get rid of these high registration fees on all of these vehicles and charge just exactly what it cost us to register a vehicle, whether that be $75, $100, $50, whatever it may be, and take that loss of revenue that we currently would expect off of that, transition that to a fuel tax, so it's a user tax, and charge it that way. So we would be giving up that high cost of stationary per
Like the
value
base
vehicle.
tax, yep.
And take that and shift that over, because in my viewpoint, I'm going to be charging that to more out-of-state people than I will be hurting the residents of Minnesota. So that's why I would propose that that might be an idea to look at.
Well, I'm just laughing because I'm in total candor here. I'm thinking, well, geez, I wonder if I could get reelected if we impose a higher tax on trucks or on, pickups. I don't think that would go over very well politically. So, I mean, that's a whole new discussion of how we're going to charge. And I don't know that we could get that through. I mean, I just don't, you can talk more about who do you think should pay higher taxes?
It's discussion, because I'm just trying to shift that away from the good old Minnesotans to the folks that drive through our state.
So then you're saying, because it would just be based on gas usage?
It would be based on fuel usage, right? The more you drive, the more fuel you use, the more you pay. Because you'd be shifting that cost of registration over to the fuel tax. I look at, the reason I bring it up is I was down at my son who has a pickup, same
I
year
know,
as mine.
right away I go to trucks and pickups. I don't know that I want to
Same
get
year
on there.
pickup as I got, and I looked at his registration deal, and it was $178 for 2 years. And I was almost $400 for 1 year. Shouldn't be that big of a difference.
Well, I wonder, Margaret Donahoe, if I could call on you, who did set the standard when, or anybody else, maybe Eric, you have this, I don't have this knowledge of, when did we decide to charge based on car value? I remember I came from Wisconsin. My tabs used to be $35 a year. Anybody else from Wisconsin in the room? Yeah.
Is that why there's so many Wisconsin vehicles registered in my apartment building?
That could be, Senator Howe. I don't know if it's still that way. I haven't owned a car in Wisconsin for about 35 years. But Margaret, do you know? Can you give us some history on that?
I don't know off the top of my head the exact year, but it's been a long time, I believe.
Does anybody know? Eric?
I don't know. It's been around since before I was around, but I think it's just a philosophical, it's a progressive way. So if you're buying a more expensive vehicle, you're going to pay a higher registration tax. I think that's kind of the basic.
All right.
I think
Representative Elkins.
exactly right. Basically, the steeply progressive nature of our registration fees is intended to offset the regressivity of the gas tax itself, so they balance. And I have to say, I did do some nosing around once to see how other states do it. It's all over the lot. There are 50 different ways of doing it, and the philosophical basis even is different in every state.
Well, I think it's interesting. I think we'll note it, and Senator Howe and I will talk about it later.
Madam Chair?
I think that's a big job. Yes, go ahead.
Greg Loper, Driver and Vehicle Services. I just want to make one note on this because, as Representative Elkins noted, there are at least 50 ways to do this, and we also deal with our Canadian provinces as well who have their ways of doing this. The one thing I will note about this is a reminder that the surcharge and the registration tax is paid upfront at the beginning of the registration period, whereas a fuel tax is paid incrementally at filling up the vehicle, and a surcharge may be, or other charges may be charged later on. And so one thing I would just like everyone to remember is to note the time value of money as we're dealing with that, because that, just to complicate the discussion further.
Well, actually, I think Representative Elkins, was it Utah who gave people the option, or was it Virginia? Somebody talked about giving people the option to pay that fee, the surcharge, over time, and that was appealing to me too, because one of the pieces of feedback we've gotten is that this big chunk of, this big payment once a year is difficult for some people, and I can understand that as well.
Yeah, that's been a dissatisfier in many states.
Yeah, I think, wasn't that Virginia that let people pay over time? Yeah, so good input. Thank you, Greg. I appreciate that. Go ahead, Amanda. Remember to introduce yourself.
Yep, Amanda Dewar with the Minnesota Auto Dealers Association, and as much as I'd love to have a conversation about vehicle registration now, we'll be interested in that in another day, but just speaking more to the scope of this group, to me, like, I don't think you can decide what to do with the EV surcharge and the charging tax in a vacuum. I think it has to be taken together. And like, if we as a group decided that it was the policy that all electricity was, going to be taxed on fuel, I think, yeah, that would be fine. But then if we do that, then I think we have to get rid of the surcharge, because then that is squarely
Double.
on EV owners, because they're already paying their registration taxes and that. So I think, this has to be like an overarching, we can't just decide like, oh, here's what we want to do with this and here's what we want to do with that. It has to be a big picture approach. That's my only thought.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Madam
Anjali?
Chair. Thank you. Anjali Baines with Fresh Energy. I agree with what Amanda from MATA said. I was going to make that same point of, because the EV specific registration fee is meant to capture the lost gas tax, that if we go towards a mileage-based user fee or, keep a public charging tax, and that needs to be addressed and reduced somehow. I'm also curious, I know I had a question that I don't think we've gotten a chance to get to in this committee yet, and it does actually pertain to trucking association and commercial vehicles, but I am curious, recognizing fairness is hard to define, but in this whole conversation, I've been curious what the how much money is coming from passenger vehicles versus commercial vehicles to our roadway user funds and highway trust funds. And I think that would be helpful just to understand. One of the things that we Fresh Energy want to make sure is, as we're addressing even incremental changes to a highway user tax distribution, that the burden of increased taxes is being equitably distributed among passenger vehicles, electric vehicles, and commercial vehicles. So I just wanted to make that point again. Thank you.
So, gas is gas. However, John, you may have some feedback on this, because we know how much gas is being used by we know how much gas is being used by trucks, right? Can you answer this question?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. John Husselodden with the Minnesota Trucking Association. We often get in this conversation about what is fair, and the trucks pay their fair share, and I can share more data with the committee, but just one data point. Right now, the trucking industry paid 32% of all taxes owed by Minnesota motorists, and yet we represent only 11% of the vehicle miles traveled in the state. Yes, we are heavier vehicles, but I would make the argument that a person driving themselves in a vehicle versus a truck delivering 40,000 pounds of medical supplies is a great value to society. So when we think about those costs, and the last thing I'd add on is there are additional taxes that trucks pay that passenger cars don't. A heavy vehicle use tax at the federal level, the tax on the tires, a federal excise tax that was established in World War I. So I can give more data to that, but there's been a lot of conversation about that and can certainly share that data.
Thank you. That was really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, John, I would love to see some of that data, because I don't know that, just like the whole issue of proportioning the mileage driven in each state, that was new to me. I'm not aware of some of this other data, so I think that would be really helpful, especially as we talk about fairness and fairness and distribution and all that. I think that would really help us frame our conversation. Anybody else have feedback about that whole issue? Yeah, I think honestly, it'd be great if we could sit around for 2 weeks and talk about fairness and how we create road policy. I know some people at the U who'd love to come talk to us about that. I don't know that realistically we can address it. I mean, I love Senator Howe's idea about really looking at high mileage vehicles and what we really do charge. I mean, these are some pretty big issues. I think at the core is what I mentioned earlier. Until we figure out a new way to fund our roads and bridges, the vast majority of our revenue comes from gas tax. And so how we implement that in a way that is fair and protects privacy and is implementable. You know, I mean, I don't want to steer the conversation in what I'm thinking, but many of the presentations that we heard has certainly steered me in one direction in terms of what I think is implementable. I mean, I think it would be great. I know that people who live in apartment buildings are subject unfairly to having to use public chargers. I know that. I get that. I don't know how we can figure that out unless we come up with some system where every apartment building gets a special charging fund. I mean, that would be great. I don't know how we can do that in a non-budget year, and I don't know how we can do that even in a budget year. I mean, there are some issues here that at this point we're just not ready to, I don't know that we can safely, or fairly solve them. But that's what we're tasked to do with our group, is to at least converse about them and maybe set up ideas for exploring in the future. Things will change. Margaret Donahoe?
Thanks, Margaret Donahoe with the Transportation Alliance. Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that because I think, you know, a lot of times with these kinds of recommendations, it's common to look at, you know, what can be done right now and then what can be done in the future. And I do think it's not a coincidence that even though states are very different on the registration tax, 41 states all charge an annual EV surcharge. It's a flat rate because it's simple, it's cost effective, and states are pretty consistent about that, although lots of states have looked at and done pilots on road user charges, and certainly that's something that should be continued to be looked at. It does have a lot of implementation challenges, and I think as we heard from some of the presentations, you know, a number of the states that have done pilots and been sort of early in this have been losing money every year on the systems that they're testing. We're really concerned about the revenue and making sure that we're gonna, you know, this is actually gonna generate more revenue than it costs to collect. And I'd also like to really stress that the surrounding states around us who have the public charging per kilowatt hour charge are maintaining the annual surcharge as well, because of the issue that we've talked about, that a lot of the charging gets done at home. So the surcharge is sort of the proxy for not charging people what they're charging at home. And the public charging fee is for the people driving through the state who aren't residents of Minnesota. And it's similar to every other special fuel. So whether it's compressed natural gas or liquefied petroleum or propane or whatever it is, we figured out a way to charge those fuels. So why can't we do the same thing with electricity? Continues to be an issue. And it's important because of our Constitution, because that revenue would be constitutionally dedicated. So I just wanted to kind of bring up those points that, again, I think we could look at what is important to be done right now and what should continue to be looked at in the future to make sure that we're actually getting more revenue than it's costing to bring it in.
Yeah, Margaret, you bring up a really good point. We have two sources of revenue. We have those people that live in Minnesota, where are they charging and how are they charging? But then we have, to Senator Howe's point, and to others in the room, we have this whole idea of the many, many people, and I'm sure, Margaret, you know how many people are from out of state that drive on our roads. We probably could easily get that data as well. We have to get that lost revenue as well. And so thanks for bringing us back to that kind of core idea. We can be very fair and think it through and decide that this is the way we're going to do it, and then our revenue tanks because it costs too much money to actually get it. So I'd rather be practical in terms of our core need to continue to collect revenue. I mean, that is really our basic We got to have the roads. Right now, we are never, I'm just going to say it out loud on the record, we are never going to catch up to the needs we have in terms of roadway maintenance, much less capacity expansion. We know that. We have data that is hardcore, irrefutable, that says if anything, we need to figure out a way to get more revenue for just filling potholes and repairing cracks, et cetera, in our roadway system. So to me, this is non-negotiable. And I'd rather be practical and have a method that actually gets us going in the positive direction than making our problem worse. So I appreciate that you brought that up.
Madam Chair, I believe someone online is.
Yep, Carolyn Behringer wants to say something. Carolyn, would you like to speak up?
Yeah, thank you so much. This is Carolyn Berninger representing Drive Electric Minnesota. I just wanted to make a really quick comment and on the topic of, trying to capture revenue from out-of-state drivers, which I agree is an important goal. I just want to make sure we're not assuming that all level 3 charging or all road trips or all public charging is out-of-state drivers. I don't think we have a very good sense of who's currently utilizing level 3 charging in the state. And I would just want to make sure we're not, assuming, okay, we're capturing Minnesotans in this bucket here through the surcharge or the mileage-based user fee or whatever it is, and this level 3 per kilowatt hour tax is a separate bucket, just when we're kind of considering the whole picture. Just wanted to raise that.
Yeah, certainly, that's true. And again, I think, I don't know, what do we have, 30 people in the room? We could each come up with our own assessment of how many, if 80% is done at home, well, then we have to look at how many miles are driven by all the people and what 20% is that. I mean, there's a lot that we're going to have to make some assumptions here in terms of how much do we charge those people that live in Minnesota that do charge at home but might take a weekend trip to Grand Marais and have to charge before they get home? I mean, there's certainly so many unknowns and assumptions that we're going to have to be comfortable with as we come up with some system. I want to remind us that, as Margaret noted, there's 41 states that are already doing a surcharge. There are 49 other states that are conversing about this. We've heard from several states who have done an enormous amount of work on this. So I would encourage us to really think of, or to reflect back on what we've heard from Utah, from Virginia, from, I think Oregon came in.
Oregon was the first state.
Yep. All of those presentations are online, and I, for one, don't think that we need to reinvent any wheel here. I think there's a lot of good work that's been happening. Representative Elkins has done an enormous amount of work in exploring vehicle miles and how we might charge for that. What else? By the way, I'm not going to drag this out for 2 hours, although I could. I could drag it out for 1 hour and 59 minutes. What other thoughts do you have? I'm just going to be quiet for a few minutes and see if anybody wants to bring up anything. Go ahead, Eric.
Thanks. Eric Rudine with MnDOT. This hadn't really occurred to me till our discussion today, but regardless of what recommendations we make as a group, it seems like this topic is something the legislature should come back to. And so maybe a recommendation could be, not that I want to sit on another work group again in 2 years or something, but it just, maybe we can have some sort of general recommendation that, the legislature is going to need to continue to evaluate and study this topic, and especially as things are going into effect and vehicle sales change and registrations change. Like, it just seems like it's something that is going to need further evaluation over the course of the next several years.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So actually writing that into one of our recommendations is that this, data be collected and the working group, a new working group be convened in X number of years to look at. I think, to that point, I think one of the things that we can put in our report is one of our, what are some of our key recommendations or our guiding principles or whatever the case may be, that we are approaching this, number one, with the assumption that things will change and that we are at the cusp of a very big change in how vehicles consume gas, how drivers purchase vehicle, whatever the case is, whatever we decide as a group. But I think we lay out some core values, assumptions, whatever, and that sets the context for how our recommendations are made. And then at the end, we have a series of recommendations that, I don't know, that if we're finding that no, never mind. I think it's good point, Eric. Go ahead.
Yeah, Madam
John.
Chair, again, John Houselot, Minnesota Trucking. I think another way to think about framing it too is clearly the legislation that was passed set some deadlines. We've learned some things that have a more immediate opportunity to fine tune. There may be more wholesale items that are bigger lifts, that are larger policy debates. So being able to say, well, we've identified some things that would be nice to get clarified, things like when the tax is collected, when it's paid. That's an easy recommendation, say that should be looked at now, that can get broad consensus. Some of these things that are more systemic, those are bigger and they can be flagged however, but because I think you can sort of take the temperature off some of these conversations if you say these are more practical, immediate, operational things that could be fixed that don't need to change the true trajectory until we have a little more time. So,
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. It looks like Representative Murphy is online with a comment. Representative Murphy?
Hello, how are you doing? My voice is a little bit scratchy today, but I'll do my best.
We can hear you barely.
Is it any better now?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, I'll try harder. I just wanted to kind of go over what I think, just from my outlook, what an option that makes sense would be, so that we can really work just on making sure that, like paying taxpayers, are paying similar amounts. And I think that's the ultimate goal of this. So here's my look at how it would work. First of all, I think we need an option for people. We need a base registration or surcharge that's maybe a little higher with an option of the Virginia plan. And so now if you're a person that drives 1,000 miles a year, the higher surcharge won't make sense for you, but you certainly will have a benefit under a Virginia-like plan. And so to give them an option, but to have a little higher surcharge, so if people said, I don't want to participate in the program with the government, I'll just pay a little bit more and I'm fine with that. Or if you're a person that drives a little bit more, for instance, I drive about 35,000 miles a year on my truck. I get about 20 miles to the gallon. My gas tax contribution is about $572 a year. So if somebody's driving similar, how do we account for that? And that's one way you could do it. You could have a higher surcharge, maybe in the neighborhood of around $350. And then you have a plan that keeps track of the person that wants to participate, like the Virginia plan, where they want to participate and keep track of their own miles. We talked about kind of the techie person that they want to keep track of it, or if they're a very low-end user driving 1,000 miles a month, maybe they'd really benefit on that. As far as our level 3 chargers go, if you look at the presentation that was given by Quick Trip and Adam, one of the things he talked about is what he ended up paying for his tax at that time, when it was 50 cents a kilowatt. He ended up putting about a $35 fill in his vehicle, $35 worth of, let's say, fuel. In this case, it was electricity. But that $35 fill at a 3 cents kilowatt tax was about $2.10. If you take a $35 gas bill at $2.75, we're putting 12.73 gallons into the car. And in that car then, at 31.8 cents, we'd be looking at a $4.05 tax, not a $2 tax. So 3 cents a kilowatt really gives us the working number to know that we need to be at about 6 cents per kilowatt, and anything we charge out at, whether it's in a parking garage or it's a private company or somebody passing through from another state, that is the rate that's most similar to what we pay as Minnesotans for a Minnesota gas tax. And so the combination of all those things gives us some options, but really makes it not based on what I pay for my house electricity, but what gas people that use gas in their engines pay toward the roads. And that's what we're looking at. That's the number we want to get to. And that's the way I think that's the starting point to try to figure that out. And my understanding of the Virginia plan is it's more of a plan that helps us to measure or account for what's happening at the car. So if we can measure what's going into the car, what the car accepts for electricity, or if it's some kind of mileage factor, that allows us to know what's happening with the car. So anyway, that's my take. That's kind of where I'm at right now. But I think there's a way of working this backwards based on cost that you can get a little closer than we're getting. So anyway, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Murphy. You actually made me think of something. We've been talking about this idea of whether to, or kind of a base, one of the things on the table is this taxing of the kilowatt hour, but nobody's really brought up what is the appropriate tax. And so I will be calling you to find out how you did that math, because I was trying to figure it out as you were talking. But I'd be interested in how you, in fact, went through that. So whether the 5 cent per kilowatt hour is so step one, do we want to stick with the kilowatt hour charge? Step two, what is that charge? And nobody's really brought that up yet. So I just want to affirm that you raised that question in my head. I do remember Minnesota is the highest, isn't it? 5 cents a kilowatt hour, Margaret?
Yeah, I did a similar calculation too, but yeah, I think we arrived at 5 cents because it's a little less than what the average person buying gas pays, but it's not that far off.
So you have that math you can
Yeah.
show me?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Any feedback on that, the 5 cents itself? We do have data that shows what everybody is charging, all of our neighbors and all of our states in the union. What does Canada do? Does anybody know?
Don't care.
Don't care. All right, let's just keep this to the 50 states, and we won't put too much burden on ourselves to keep going. But the 5 cents itself, I think, is something that we should keep as one of our topics of conversation as well. Oh, sir.
Hi, my name is Xavier, fellow Minnesota constituent.
Can you step up to one of the microphones just so people online can hear you? Is your first name Xavier or your?
Yeah, Xavier.
Xavier, yep, just sit down at one of them, and I'm not sure, DeMarco, which one works?
All of them are live, Madam Chair.
Okay, so just sit down, Xavier, we welcome your conversation, but give us your first and your last name.
Okay. I'm Xavier, and
Xavier, what's your last name?
it's Smead.
Yeah, Smee, okay, thank you.
And the thing I wanted to address at this moment, I didn't know if I'd have to wait to the end.
No.
Another thing I wanted to talk about as well. So I guess I'll bring that up as well right now. But the thing I wanted to address was about the 5 cent kilowatt hour. My father gets his electricity through Exo Energy, and he has an EV car. And Exo Energy said that they would honor at night a cheaper rate. And right now, he's having very difficult times getting them to just honor that. And he charges usually at night.
Okay.
Not only is it cheaper, but there's less people that are getting the electricity at that time. And so it would be more beneficial for him to get that electricity as well as other people at that time because it's just sitting there and unused and less used. So I'm wondering what kind of enforcements or regulations are being placed on Xcel around this kind of stuff?
I don't know, but I know Representative Elkins, you mentioned that you charge at night because you get a lower rate?
Yeah, so I do get a much lower rate. So, but Mr. Singh, does your father live in an apartment or in a home?
He has his own home.
His own home. He should be able to just sign up for Excels. There's actually a couple. I'm on one that meters the whole house.
Yep, he did that.
You did that.
Like
So
everything should be good to go and Excel's just not honoring it.
Yeah.
And I've had friends who've had issues with other issues that are not EV related, but are Excel related with electricity that have come up. And so I don't know if this is just Excel kind of being difficult to work with or what's going on, but I mean, it should be good to go. There's no red flags.
Yeah, they have to put in a smart meter, but they put in smart meters everywhere now. So everybody's got the meter. I think Angela might.
Thank you, Representative Elkins, Madam Chair. So Xavier, there is actually going to be there's an open comment period right now on Excel's EV plans, essentially.
Okay.
So if you want to, we can talk afterwards. I can show you where to do a public comment, but you can basically have you or your father put in a comment to Excel's EV programs and as a public comment and explain this issue so that the commissioners can consider that when they're considering Excel's broader portfolio of EV programs and how they operate them.
Okay.
So I pay 5 cents a kilowatt hour from 9 PM to 9 AM and all weekend, all day on the weekends and all day on the holidays.
So that sounds like something that Anjali can help you with. I'm sure there's probably others in the room that can help. We do have somebody from Excel on this group, but he's not here today. But is there anything else you wanted to offer up?
Yeah, that leads me into my next question about electricity. As far as the apartments go, you kind of talked that there wasn't really EV chargers for people necessarily low income or just people that live in an apartment in general. It doesn't have to be low income. Not having the accessibility to an EV or being able to get the EV set up with their electric car because they live in the apartment. I think it would be great if Minnesota would set up some kind of grants to maybe help out the apartments or the apartment owners to get solar panels or not necessarily solar panels with EV chargers that would then allow for cheaper or green technology for Minnesotans to not only get green, clean energy, but also help reduce our greenhouse emissions in general.
Yeah, Xavier, I know we talked, I was gone from the legislature for 2 years. I know that was being talked about the first time I was here, and I'm not sure where that is right now. But I think that could be something that we put into our recommendations section. That's independent of this. So there may be something happening that somebody else might be able to answer. But for this report, I think that might be something that we choose to put in as a recommendation, that we look at ways to fund EV charging opportunities for people in multifamily housing, because I think that that's been brought up by several people in the working group, that the fact that people who live in those, who do not own their own homes or do not control their charging situation in their residence, that's not really fair. So I hear you loud and clear.
Well, so for example, my brother also has an electric vehicle, and he doesn't have a home where he can charge it on, and he's constantly paying at the EV charging station around town. And in the colder weather, he's losing a decent amount of electricity just from the design factors. And so not only is he being taxed on the electricity in general, but he's being taxed on his loss because of the designs.
Yeah.
So like, I just like wondering like what kind of things are going to be implemented for people with EVs that don't have access to this kind of stuff, or even like cost, you know?
Yeah, it's important.
And
Go ahead, Representative.
the new apartment buildings in Minnesota do have to have charging facilities.
Oh, I did not know that. So is that a code thing, that new buildings have to have?
We actually passed a law, and it's been implemented through the building code process.
All right. Well, that means in about 200 or 300 years, we should have charging stations in every, I don't mean to make light of it, but, so, duly noted. Do you have anything else?
No, that's it.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate your feedback.
Yeah, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Xavier. All right. Anybody else have anything they want to make sure that we talk about? Go ahead, Representative Elkins.
Could I go up and just put one slide up real
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to do this real quick.
So for those of you that are not in the room, Representative Elkins is going to put a slide up on the screen. I'm guessing it has to do with his research around road user charges?
Well, this is simpler than that.
No, even simpler than that.
Marco's head to see what I plug in.
All right. So as Representative Elkins is getting ready, the last thing that we're going to talk about once we're done with getting discussion is the process by which we're going to decide what goes into the report and how it goes into the report. So we're thinking about that. I mean, it's not, we're not going to, be real rigid about it, whatever we talk about today, but I'd like us to start thinking about how as a committee or as a working group, we're going to decide on what our recommendations will look like. So Representative Elkins, we'll just wait for you to get your slide up, and then
It might be a moment, Madam Chair.
it might be a while.
Mail it to DeMarco.
Go ahead. Amanda Doerr has something to say.
Yeah, no, I was, to that point, Madam Chair, Amanda Doerr, Minnesota Auto Dealers. I'm also part of the working group on connected and automated vehicles, and we just finished our report for the year. And I would say one thing that I thought was helpful in there in the recommendations was like, if it was a consensus item, there was a thing like, this is largely a consensus item. But if there was something that was in there that maybe had some disagreement amongst the parties, it wasn't called out specifically, but just say, some parties think this and something, so that those reading it could see like, okay, this is something that everybody largely agreed to. I thought that was a good way of drafting it.
I like that idea too.
Did you get it yet?
So there certainly will be some things that I would hope there's some things that we all agree to, things like foundational beliefs or core values, et cetera, whatever. And there will be some things that we disagree with, but I, for one, think it's important that we include all of the topics. Go ahead, Greg.
You said it better than I could.
Oh, well, thank you, Greg. I appreciate that. Yeah, so remember that I can't remember who, maybe it was John, somebody talked about doing a kind of like in the next few years, we need to, oh, maybe it was Eric Rudine, sorry. We need to revisit some of these issues because one thing's for sure, technology is changing, and we may see a point where everybody's driving EVs and we have no gas tax. What are we going to do then? We're certainly going to have to reconvene as a working group. Some of you will be here and some of you won't. I should say some of us will be here and some of us won't. So any other thoughts? Otherwise, we're just going to be quiet.
Well, just in time.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Anjali.
So while we agree, Anjali Baines with Fresh Energy, we agree that a solution for EVs should be found. EVs only actually make up 1% of all vehicles, so we do, one of our other positions that we noted in our recommendation, but we haven't mentioned that.
Can I scroll down here?
That some of these, you know, while we actually support transitioning to a mileage-based user fee for all the reasons that others have noted here, we also support in that kind of context getting rid of the public charging tax because EV drivers in Minnesota would be charged then through the mileage-based user fee. We also want to note that the EV market is still very nascent. Again, only 1% of vehicles on the road are electric vehicles. So the more policies we can also attach to, we call them trigger points or threshold points, but if there could be a number where, like, okay, once the EV penetration reaches 5% or 10%, then some of these other kind of fees and inspection policy get put on there. That's something we want to just raise up as a way to make sure that the public charging market is still being incentivized, that we're still able to reduce some of the other challenges around getting enough EV chargers and EVs on the road in the near term, while recognizing that there's a longer term need to find a solution to make sure that EVs are contributing in the fashion of gas vehicles to our road user funds.
So yes, I agree. And I'm curious how that 10%, is that just something that you're just saying, for example?
For example, yes. We'd have to do more, do some analysis to figure out what that threshold would be.
Yeah, exactly. I agree, because I think that there is a way for us to determine what that trigger point is in terms of revenue loss. I think we had asked for that information, and it's somewhat hard to get. I know we don't have it yet. How much revenue we're losing every year due to a reduction in the number of combustion vehicles. So yes, I agree. I think to whoever's point it was before, there are some definite triggering points where things will definitely change. I think you also bring up a good point. 1% of electric vehicles, are we going to talk about vehicle miles traveled? Are we going to talk about vehicles, period? Are we going to talk about impact on the environment? There is a lot of ways that we can, should the, little lady who has the 1995 Cadillac that she drives to church twice a year, should she be unfairly charged, right? We have to make some assumptions about what it means to own a car. And again, you know, I might drive downtown every day for a year, but I need the same road that the person who drives to the Guthrie once a year to watch the Christmas story or the Christmas production. The road, it needs to be there, whether you're using it 365 days a year or once a year. So I think, you know, I would recommend that we not think too much about some of this. But I definitely concur that there are some triggering points where we are going to have to reassess what's happening. So, Representative Elkins, do you have your picture up?
Yeah, this is
Okay.
a truck example. It occurred to me as we were having this conversation that Senator Howe and I might actually be in violent agreement.
Oh, I love it.
Yep. So I think this is the formula that he was describing. So if you take his Ford F-150 pickup, which latest model gets something like 19.4 miles per gallon, and assume it's driven the average of per vehicle of 11,500 miles at a 31.8 cent per gallon gas tax, that would generate $189 a year in gas taxes.
Okay.
So if you take the Ford F-150 Lightning and drive at that same 11,500 miles, the number of miles isn't that important as long as it's consistent between the two vehicles, and you start off by saying, okay, I need to generate the same $189 a year that I generate in gas taxes from the Ford F-150 regular, equates to a charge per mile of about 1.64 cents per mile. So the math is pretty simple.
Well, it's simple. Help me, just take me one more step. So how do you determine how many kilowatt hours is it per mile?
Well, the Ford F-150 Lightning gets 68 EMPG, so you can convert that, take the mileage and that MPGE to figure out how many kilowatt hours, but I don't think that's a mathematical step that you actually need to take. I think I'm hearing an agreement around the table that like vehicles driven the same amount of miles should be paying the same tax.
Right, and I think you do, the reason I ask is because I'm trying to get to this 5 cent per kilowatt hour. Like, how do you get to the 1.64 cents per mile as the MB
Let's see, you just
UF rate?
take.
Or did you come up with the 189 divided by 11,500?
That's the one.
Okay.
So if you want to collect the same amount of revenue, $189 from both, then you just divide that by the same 11,500 assumed miles, and that's how you get to the 1.64 cents per mile.
Right, and that I understand. There's one more little math equation, though. It goes from 1.64 multiplied by, or divided by the kilowatt hour, right? It's, the tax is.
Yeah, so you'd have to take from the 68 EMPG,
Yep.
you can calculate that, I
Right.
think, pretty easily. I'm not
Okay.
going to try and do it on the fly, but.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have questions about this? So just what you're saying is the revenue, the $189 is the challenge, right?
Yep, you want the Ford F-150 Lightning to be paying the same amount as a regular Ford F-150.
Right, but what I'm saying is the $189 is the challenge to agree to. Like, we agree that and I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm just trying to clarify in my brain. So the number, the $189 is what we agree to based on miles per gallon, miles driven by the Ford F-150 driver, et cetera, right?
So the two vehicles driven the same amount of miles should pay the same amount.
Yep.
So you could change the number of miles on this chart to whatever you want, as long as the number of miles is the same on both sides.
Understood. Well, I think that's a worthy goal. Does anybody have any aversion to saying that's a worthy goal?
It's a worthy
Senator Howe?
goal, but I think we still have to do that math with the 68 MPGE and the 164 per mile to get that.
Right, the input variables are going to be the thing
Right.
that
I mean,
we
because that's great,
have to
except
agree
for,
on.
like me, I drive 26,000 miles a year, for instance, on my pickup, because it's a 2018 and now has 178,000 miles on it, so.
Yeah, so for your example, you just put in, your 35,000 miles on both sides of the equation, but the rate is still going to come out at 1.64 cents a mile.
But Representative Elkins, doesn't this number change based on gas efficiency?
So in the way I have it right now in my bill, there would be 5 rates. There would be one for sedans, one for car-based. The EPA has 5 different
Okay,
classes
so
of
you are
vehicles.
acknowledging that different types of vehicles have different general MPG values.
Except for the fact that like this weekend, when I had to put on a trailer on my vehicle, instead of getting the 26 miles to the gallon that I normally get driving down to the cities, I got 8.
I know.
So
When we tow our, I
and I
want a
don't know how
special
you
rate for
figure
when
that
we
into
tow
that
our boat.
calculation.
I know.
The same
We
thing
get
would
8
happen
miles a
with the
gallon.
electric version of the pickup.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, and I appreciate this. I think the point you're trying to make is that,
We don't need to overcomplicate this.
yes, that's right. And we certainly have variability in how each one of us, if my car is packed with, enough stuff to take my kid to college, it's getting different gas mileage than if it's just my very skinny daughter driving with feathers in her backpack. So, I mean, but it's a good point, and I appreciate that you brought it up.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be our challenge, is agreeing what numbers we're going to use for the input. But I like that you bring it up, and I like that we can agree that we want to see fair assessment, whether you're driving a gas-powered vehicle and you're paying tax to support the roads, or you're driving an electric vehicle and you're paying tax to support the roads. And let's not forget about the bridges, right? So thank you, Steve, or thanks, Representative Elkins. I appreciate that. All right, the last thing then, just to see if there's any aversion or feedback around Amanda's idea, which I concur is a good way to do it, where we do bring, Danny and I will come up with a list of more detailed description of what each one of our recommendations are. And when I say each one of ours, I mean ours, the whole group. And we'll bring that to our next meeting, which is on Monday, January 21st. So we'll be closer to, are we going to meet that day? Is that MLK Day?
Austin, do you have it? Yeah, one second.
I think it's MLK Day. Am I wrong? Oh, no, it's not. Oh, that's a Wednesday. So this is a Wednesday. Yeah, it's Wednesday, January 21st. Because the first day at the U is the 20th, or the 19th, the 20th. Yep. So that's Wednesday, January 21st is the date. And so we'll be meeting at 9 a.m. And we'll bring a list categorized by topic of all of the ideas we have. So if you have some ideas that you haven't submitted yet, I encourage you to send them in. And we will start to decide what we have consensus on, what we want to do in terms of recommendations for further exploration or further study. I mean, that's an opportunity for us too. As we head into session, there may be something that we want to fund or something we want to call out for further opportunities. And then we'll start to go through really hammering out what we want to include in our report. Greg.
Senator, thank you so much. I want to recommend something that we did for the motor vehicle tab compliance working group that I chaired. And that was, prior to that last meeting, what we did was we sent out the recommendations to the members of the working group, and we had each of them reply favorably or unfavorably on each recommendation. What that did was that did a couple of things. One, it saved a great deal of time in meeting, which I'm always in favor of. But the other thing it did is it removed any of the biases that we might have. And so rather than someone having to say in public, was this right on? We did that at an anonymous level. And that worked out very well to provide so that we could look at all of the recommendations that were there. So I give that to you as something that we found very helpful and might work in this particular instance.
That's fantastic. I think that's a really good idea. How do other people feel about that? Go ahead, Eric.
Madam Chair, I would, kind of like Amanda was saying earlier, like maybe there's levels too. So like strongly support, support, neutral, maybe it's kind of a range.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a really good idea, and I also like the idea of getting a feel around the temperature of, this is something that I'm opposed to very strongly, or something that I think is something I could, be okay with. So I like it.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, Angela.
I like the idea of the voting system. I would say, since we are a public process, I would say if the votes are recorded, we should have the associations with them, because I think it's important for the public to know where different groups stand, and the potential, just knowing where different groups stand, I think is important. So I like the idea of voting, but I don't think it should be anonymous.
Yeah, Austin?
If there's any formal voting, it would need to be in the meeting in public. If, like Member Rudin mentioned, there's some sort of gauging of interest, I think that would likely be more okay in terms of open meeting law. But as opposed to kind of favorably or unfavorably, that's tiptoeing close to a violation.
Okay. Well, I to your point, Greg, though, I think people might also be more willing to rate it publicly on paper than in a room. I mean, how do you feel about that? What are your thoughts?
Madam Chair, thank you for allowing me the input. I was one of the things I think as we look at this, which is clearly a challenging question and one that the people around this table have put a great deal of time and effort into, it's one where there may be people may have favorable reactions to conflicting or complementary ideas. And so where I'm most interested in this, Madam Chair, is that the group comes out being able to provide the greatest information to our lawmakers so decisions can be made from a position of knowledge.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we'll discuss. I think there's definitely benefits to gauging temperature within the legality of our charge. But I also think it's important, as Angeline noted, for us to represent our stakeholder organizations so that we know where people stand and how to move forward.
Yeah, Madam Chair, John Houselot, Trucking. Again, I would just say I see a lot of public state-run groups using Mentimeters as gauging interest. They're not recorded. They just get you in the ballpark. So I liken this more to a Mentimeter type activity than it is formal vote, but I think getting where we are is helpful.
Austin and I don't know what that is.
Oh, it's just online voting. It's anonymous online voting. You put up a question and you react to it. And the challenge is the voters have to react to the questions. You don't get to have.
So it doesn't, it's not skewed based on who responds. You really have to work to get.
Yeah.
I will confer with my attorney as to if that's okay. But I understand what you mean. Those are like when you're at a conference and there's everybody has it on their phone, right? Well, I certainly think there's value in doing some work ahead of time so that we're not sitting here, 2 weeks from now doing voting and going through 48 recommendations. So we'll have to figure that out somehow. But trust that we will come back with a agenda item that is workable, but also efficient, but also, meets the requirements of our charge legislatively. So I think that's really important. Any other feedback? Well, you have all been very good at being willing to discuss in public, and I really appreciate that. It's hard to manage a group of people who don't necessarily come with the comfort of working together, and I think everybody has risen to the occasion. I've really enjoyed all the learning that we've done during this process. We certainly have an opportunity to clarify anything on the 21st. If you have questions or concerns and you want us to bring in anybody back who might offer some insight to one of the specific presentations, I think that's doable, either in person or we can talk to them ahead of time. So with that, I think we've certainly done a good job of at least getting through some of our ideas, gauging interest in looking forward both to the 21st, but then also in terms of what the report's going to contain. And so I encourage you to think and offer up any additional insight before the 21st, and then be prepared to come back and advocate for those ideas that you think are most important. With what I would recommend is a focus on the implementable and the practical. Things that are not implementable or impractical, we can certainly include in the report. I don't know that there are things we're going to be able to tackle in the 2026 legislative session. That doesn't mean we can't talk about them, so. One last chance to raise your voice. Any questions, comments? Anybody online? All right, with that, I'll adjourn the meeting, and we'll see you on the 21st.